He told me the mission failed because of me. But years later, when I opened that classified file, I found my own name listed under Target. Now I know who really pulled the trigger, and why they never wanted me to come back alive. I raised my glass because it was easier than speaking. Zach's laugh, the deep, show-off kind that filled every space, rose above the others as he said, "To Erin Blake, our family's paper pilot." The table roared. Bottles clinked, chairs scraped against the deck, and someone slapped the wood for emphasis. Their laughter rolled over me like surf, bright and familiar. I smiled the way they expected me to, small, polite, invisible. If any of them had ever smelled the inside of a burning fuselage, they might have known that smoke clings to your hair long after you shower. If any of them had ever heard a man scream through a failing radio, they'd know silence can be merciful. But no one here knew who Revenant One was. The wind coming off the Atlantic smelled of salt and charcoal. My brother, Zachary Blake, Coach Z to his gym clients, hometown hero in perpetual training mode, stood at the head of the picnic table, his arms slung over our father's shoulders. Dad's grin beamed with a pride that could blind you. Retired Navy, still wearing the posture of command, he nodded at Zach like he'd just delivered a mission report instead of a bad joke. I kept my eyes on the condensation sliding down my beer can. The metal was so cold it burned. They laughed because it was comfortable. I stayed quiet because it was safe. That night, as fireworks popped somewhere down the coast and my family's laughter turned into background noise, I made myself a promise. The next time they mocked me, I wouldn't stay silent. The waves were louder by the time I reached the shore. Sand under my bare feet cool and damp. Behind me, the deck lights shimmered like a constellation built on wood and noise. Ahead, the sea kept its secrets. I had grown up with 3 rules in this town. Stay quiet. Work hard. Don't cross the line. I had already broken all 3 before turning 25. My father's name still carried weight around here. Commander Blake, the man who'd taught half the county how to stand straight and salute smartly. Zach inherited his confidence, his voice, and his legend. I'd inherited the silence that held their stories together. They called Zach a leader. They called me brave for being a girl. I let them. Words are dangerous when the truth you carry is stamped classified. Sometimes, late at night, I still heard the cockpit alarms, the red light flooding the dash, the hiss of hydraulic failure. A voice crackling through static. "We're pinned down. Revenant One, do you copy?" And my own voice, calm because someone had to be. "Copy. I'm not leaving you behind." The night the helicopter went down off Mogadishu still lived under my skin. The smell of diesel, the sting of sweat in my eyes, the blur of heat and dust. The silence afterward, so thick you could taste it, was the kind of quiet that never really leaves. Weeks later, my commanding officer had called me in. His office smelled like burnt coffee and bureaucracy. "Captain Blake owes you his men's lives," he'd said. "Sir, he knows it was you. He just hasn't said it." I nodded, not trusting my voice. So that was the truth hiding in plain sight. My father, Captain Roland Blake, retired SEAL, had been under my wing that night. He knew who saved him. He just never said it out loud. Maybe silence was his way of protecting the myth he'd built for Zach, the legend of Blake's strength, of father and son carved from the same stone. But every story has a cost, and in ours, the price was me. When I got back from that mission, Dad had said almost absently, "Some people get applause. Others get the sound of engines." I'd pretended to understand. Now I know he meant, "I see you, but I can't say it." But the quiet didn't comfort me anymore. It pressed down, heavy as salt in an open wound. The moon was high when I found him again that night, standing where the surf met the sand, a beer can hanging from his fingers. His reflection shimmered in the tide, tall and still. He didn't turn when he spoke. "Thank you, Erin." The words cracked through the dark like a flare. "I know you were Revenant One." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I said, "I just did my job." He exhaled, long and low. "You could have told them." "Told him." "You didn't." He turned then. Moonlight caught the lines etched into his face. I didn't want Zach to feel small. I met his eyes. So, you made me smaller instead. He didn't argue. Just nodded, gaze drifting back to the horizon. You're right. My team still owes you one. But in the service, we don't say thank you out loud. We remember. I studied him, the man who taught me discipline and restraint, who saluted before he hugged. He wasn't cruel. Just trapped in a generation that mistook acknowledgement for weakness. The order they protected so fiercely was suffocating the rest of us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Keep your silence if it keeps you comfortable, I said quietly. But the next time someone laughs at me, I won't stay quiet. For the first time that night, his expression softened. Good, he said. You've earned the right. The tide crawled higher, foam licking at our feet. The moon painted the waves silver. Between us hung everything we hadn't said, the line between pride and love, loyalty and fear. I turned back toward the house. The laughter drifted faintly through the wind. This would be the last summer my silence protected anyone but me. 2 years passed before I came home again. The road along the Florida coast looked the same, pines leaning toward the wind, sand dusting the asphalt like memory, but something in me had changed. The easy rhythm of small-town noise no longer fit the cadence of my breathing. The sky still held the same blue I used to love, yet it felt distant, like a photograph of someplace I used to belong. The Blake house sat at the edge of the dunes, its porch light already glowing in the late afternoon haze. From the yard came the sharp crack of laughter and the smell of grilled meat. For a heartbeat, I thought about turning back. Then I saw Zach at the grill, beer in hand, every movement loud with confidence. When he spotted me, he raised his drink and grinned. Look who's back. Commander Blake, straight from the big bad Navy. You still remember how to breathe outside a simulator. The crowd, friends, neighbors, cousins, burst into laughter. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because I refused to give him the power of seeing me flinch. Depends on the altitude, I said, letting the words slice clean. The laughter faltered, hanging in the air like smoke. Even the wind seemed to still. Dad looked up from his chair, pride and warning battling behind his eyes. Zach's grin twitched. Relax, sis. I'm just kidding. Sure you are. I joined the table, the same circle of faces I'd grown up with. They talked about new gym equipment, old fishing trips, and a local high school football win. No one asked about my missions or the months spent in airfields half a world away. They didn't want the weight of that kind of story at a barbecue. A new voice cut through the chatter. A deep, rough laugh from across the yard. Remember that pilot who saved your team off Mogadishu, Cap? Sergeant Mason Hale. Dad's old SEAL buddy. Back for another reunion. He slapped Dad's shoulder. What was her call sign again? For a moment, the only sound was the sea. Dad hesitated. I watched his jaw tighten. Then, quietly, he said, Revenant One. Hell of a pilot. The words hit like thunder after a long drought. Zach chuckled, oblivious. At least that pilots got guts. Some folks only fly in circles. Something inside me snapped, not with anger, but with clarity. I set my glass down. Some of us fly where there are no do-overs. The table went still. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. I stood before anyone could respond. The beach was waiting, darkening beneath a rising moon. Down by the water, the noise from the house faded until all I heard was the ocean breathing. Foam reached for my toes, pulling and retreating. I thought about the first time I'd flown after the crash, hands shaking against the control stick, breath measured to hide the fear. Command had called it courage. I'd called it survival. Revenant One. The call sign still echoed in my head like a heartbeat. Behind the name was a truth no one here wanted to acknowledge. I'd been the one to bring them home. My father's men. My father himself. The classified report had buried my name beneath layers of ink, but those who were there remembered. They just didn't speak. Silence was their language. Later that night, I found Dad in the kitchen. The room was dim except for the blue light of the television flickering across his face. A half-empty bottle sat beside his elbow. You know this isn't harmless, I said softly. He didn't look up. I just don't want to turn this house into a battlefield. Your silence already did. He flinched, barely. Zach doesn't mean anything by it. That's the problem. He doesn't mean anything. He just repeats what he's been taught, what you never corrected. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between us. Finally, he sighed. Maybe it's time someone else fired the first shot. His words caught me off guard. For a second, I saw not the commander, but a tired man realizing his walls were built in the wrong direction. Outside, fireworks exploded, bright, short-lived bursts that painted the window glass red and gold. Their smoke curled against the night, fading as quickly as it came. In the reflection, I saw both of us, him with his guilt, me with my resolve. The next time they came for me with laughter, I would let the truth detonate. 3 years later, I was back again. The occasion, my father's 60th birthday. The guest list read like a reunion of legends, old SEALs, local officials, every Blake neighbor who'd ever told a war story secondhand. The air smelled of salt, sweat, and nostalgia. I stood at the edge of the yard, feeling like a ghost watching her own life replay. Zach spotted me first. He lifted his beer like a trophy. Look who's here. Erin Blake, the Navy's favorite desk jockey. The laughter hit, predictable as the tide. I walked closer, steady, my smile cool. Still flying, I said. Just not as low as you think. The laughter died. Dad's gaze snapped toward me, sharp, assessing. Pride and warning again. Only now the warning wasn't for me. Zach tried to backtrack. Come on, sis. I'm kidding. You know I love you, right? You love the sound of yourself, I said quietly. Someone behind him, one of the guests, laughed uncertainly. You military too, sweetheart? What's your call sign? Zach smirked. Oh yeah, let's hear it. Maybe paper wings. I let the silence stretch until it hurt. Then I said, clear enough for everyone to hear. Revenant One. The effect was instant. The yard fell still. A veteran's voice broke through. Wait. You were the pilot in Mogadishu. Dad rose from his chair, the commander's presence returning to his shoulders. Zach, he said, voice low but carrying apologize. Dad, it's just a joke. For mocking the pilot who saved my men. The words hit harder than any shout. Zach's color drained. You mean her? Dad nodded. She flew through the fire so we could come home. And you laughed at her. Nobody moved. The sound of the surf filled the space where laughter used to live. Zach's voice came out small. I didn't know. I stood very still. You didn't ask. He swallowed, eyes darting between us. I'm sorry. It's fine, I said, though we both knew it wasn't. Dad reached into his pocket, pulled out a brass coin, the kind passed between soldiers in silence. He placed it in my palm. To the one who flew through fire, he said. You earned this years ago. I should have given it then. Fireworks flared over the trees, but their noise felt distant. The coin gleamed gold against my skin, heavy with unspoken things. Later, I drove along the coast, windows down, the night thick with salt and smoke. Headlights swept across the waves. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. I felt clean, like something had finally broken loose inside me. When I pulled over by the dunes, Dad's truck appeared behind me. He stepped out, sleeves rolled. Not the captain now, just a man chasing his own ghosts. You shouldn't have had to wait for me to speak, he said. But I did, I answered. He handed me a folded envelope, an official mission report stamped Operation Revenant. My name was blacked out under thick lines of ink. They classified everything, he said, voice rough. But we never forgot your call sign. He paused, eyes glassy. I thought silence would protect you. I was wrong. It only protected my ego and Zach's. Yeah, I said softly. Him too. He pulled another coin from his pocket, older, worn. This one's from my team. We kept it for the day we could thank you right. I looked at both coins in my hand, their metal glowing faint gold in the moonlight. We're good, Captain. Just don't stay silent again. He nodded toward the waves. No more silence. As I turned to leave, he added, Zach's not angry at you. He's angry at himself for not earning what you did. Then maybe it's time he learns how to earn something real. The wind shifted, cool and steady. I closed my fingers around the coins, their weight a promise. Behind us, the tide rolled in, carrying away the last echoes of the night. No more silence. I didn't sleep that night. The sea outside my window kept breathing in and out, slow and relentless, like a pulse that refused to calm. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shimmer of that dinner table chandelier, the look in my brother's eyes when the truth hit him, the weight in my father's silence. By sunrise, I was still awake, sitting at my desk, uniform jacket draped over the chair, a cup of coffee gone cold beside me. The letter from the Department of Defense lay open in front of me. The official seal caught the morning light. They were reinstating my commendation. Not just reinstating it, awarding it publicly. A ceremony, next Friday, on the air base where everything had ended. The same hangar where Revenant One had rolled out for its first mission. For a moment, my hand trembled over the page. I had imagined recognition before, but always in a private way, quiet, solemn, maybe years later when no one was watching. Not like this. Not standing before cameras, reporters, old commanders, ghosts. Still, I knew what I had promised myself on the beach. No more silence. So I pressed my thumbprint against the acceptance line, sealed the envelope, and felt a strange steadiness settle over me. 3 days later, I was back in the air. The base looked both smaller and larger than I remembered. Smaller because time had stripped away the fear, larger because memory had filled every corner with meaning. The hangar doors gleamed, new paint over old scars. Captain Blake. The voice pulled me back. Commander Riley, older, hair silver at the edges, same measured gaze. You look like someone coming home and leaving again at the same time. Maybe I am, I said. He nodded toward the tarmac where a formation of younger pilots waited for inspection. They've read about you. The mission's declassified now. You're a legend. I almost laughed. A legend, the title they give to people who didn't have time to become human again. Riley walked beside me toward the control tower. You could have stayed quiet, Erin. The board would have kept your name buried, and no one would have blamed you for letting it fade. But you didn't. Because I'm done pretending it didn't matter, I said. What we lost deserves to be seen. He smiled, the faintest flicker of pride. Then make them see it. The day of the ceremony arrived cold and sharp, sky clear enough to cut. I stood at the edge of the stage, looking out at a sea of uniforms, journalists, and civilians. My family sat in the front row. Dad, rigid but proud. Mom with a hand pressed to her mouth. Zach beside her, eyes fixed on me. When my name was called, the world seemed to pause. Every sound dulled except for the echo of my boots on metal steps. For extraordinary valor and selfless leadership in the field, the general's words washed over me, formal and distant. But underneath them, I could hear another voice, the frantic radio chatter from that night, the scream of engines, the last breath of my co-pilot when the mountain flashed white. I took the medal, saluted, and looked directly at the crowd. This isn't just mine, I said, my voice steady into the microphone. It belongs to every name we couldn't bring home. Their silence built the freedom we stand on. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, just the wind. Then the applause rose like thunder. When it faded, I stepped down from the stage, and my father was there. He didn't say a word at first. He just pulled me into a rough, uncertain hug, the kind that starts as an apology and ends as pride. I should have believed you, he whispered. I should have known what you carried. You do now, I said. That's enough. That night, the base hosted a small gathering in the officers' lounge. The room buzzed with laughter, music, clinking glasses. But I found myself standing near the window again, watching the runway lights blink like distant stars. Zach came up beside me, holding 2 coffees instead of champagne. You still drink it black? Some things don't change. He handed me a cup and leaned on the glass. You know, when you left for flight school, I told everyone my sister was crazy. Said you were chasing smoke. Turns out you were chasing a purpose. I smiled. And did you find yours yet? He hesitated, then said quietly, I think I'm starting to. Outside, a formation of jets streaked overhead in salute, trails crossing in the twilight. One peeled off from the group, an old tradition called the missing man. Zach watched it fade into the clouds. They say that one's for the pilot who never made it home. Yeah, I said softly. But sometimes it's also for the part of you that finally does. Later that week, I drove back to the coast. The same stretch of beach where I'd made my promise, now calmer. The sky wide and forgiving. The tide crept close to my boots, leaving glistening arcs on the sand. I took the medal from my pocket. It gleamed, heavy and cold. For a long moment I just looked at it, then knelt, dug a shallow hollow in the sand, and set it down. Not to bury it, but to let the tide touch it once before I took it home. The water reached, shimmered, and retreated, leaving a faint sheen of salt on the metal. I whispered their names, every crew member, every call sign, and felt the weight inside me shift. Not gone, but lighter, finally shared with the world that had ignored it too long. As I stood, the horizon brightened. A single jet roared far above, leaving a contrail that split the morning sky. I saluted once, not to anyone watching, but to everything that had brought me here. The week after the ceremony, life slowed into something unfamiliar. For the first time in years, I wasn't counting days until deployment, or waiting for another order stamped classified. I woke to silence instead of static, to the steady rhythm of my own breathing instead of the hum of engines. Yet even peace, when you've lived too long in chaos, can feel like enemy territory. I found myself walking the coastline each morning, tracing the same path I'd taken before the ceremony, half expecting the ghosts to meet me there again. But they didn't. The wind was empty now, just air, not memory. Still, a part of me waited for something I couldn't name. 3 nights later, I got a message. It was from an unknown number, marked restricted. The text read, "We need to talk. Meet me at Hangar 47, 0900 hours. R." At first, I thought it was Commander Riley, but the signature didn't fit his usual formality. And then I realized who R might actually be. Revenant One. The codename that shouldn't have existed anymore. I stared at the message for a long time, pulse climbing. Every protocol in me said to delete it, report it, pretend it never came. But there was something about the timing, something deliberate. By morning, I was driving toward the base again, heart steady but mind burning. Hangar 47 stood apart from the others, half decommissioned, half preserved like a fossil. When I arrived, the air was still, the light slanting through high windows in dusty stripes. And there he was, Ethan Ward, my co-pilot's brother, the one who had vanished after the crash. He turned when I stepped inside, older, leaner, a faint scar cutting across his jaw. His eyes met mine, steady and unreadable. "Erin," he said quietly, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I." He gave a faint, sad smile. "You got your medal. Finally. I didn't ask for it." "I know." He looked down, then reached into his jacket. "That night, before the blast, my brother sent me this. He said if anything happened, I'd know who to trust." He handed me a flash drive. Black, unmarked, cold as a bullet. "What's on it?" I asked. "Everything they erased," he said. "Telemetry, orders, communication logs. And a file, your name on it." My stomach tightened. "My name?" He nodded. "You weren't supposed to come back alive, Erin. Someone higher up, someone on your own team, flagged your craft for a recovery sequence. But it didn't recover. It was containment." I froze. "You're saying—" "They set you up," he said simply. "And my brother died trying to override it." For a long moment, all I could hear was the hum of the lights above us. Then I said, "Who?" Ethan hesitated, then looked me squarely in the eye. "Commander Riley." The name hit like a shockwave. Riley, my mentor, my defender. The man who'd vouched for me when no one else would. I wanted to deny it, to reject it outright. But the memory of his words after the ceremony, You could have stayed quiet, Erin echoed with a new, sharper edge. I took the flash drive from Ethan's hand. If this is true, we'll prove it. He shook his head. You don't understand. You were meant to be silenced then. If you expose this now, they'll find another way. Then let them try, I said, voice steel. I'm not disappearing again. That night, I drove straight to my old apartment near the airfield. I sat in the dark, laptop open, the flash drive waiting like a heartbeat. When I finally plugged it in, the screen flickered, then a folder appeared. /Revenant_1/com_logs/classified. I opened the last recording. Static hissed, then a voice, Riley's. Subject Blake showing deviation from the mission vector. Engage containment protocol. No survivors outside Operation Tier. The air went cold. I heard my own younger voice crackle in response. Panicked, shouting coordinates. Then the explosion. The screen blinked once, then went black. And with it, every illusion I'd built around the idea of loyalty. I didn't sleep. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. I copied the entire file set onto an encrypted drive and made my way to Washington. There was only one person who could take this public without it vanishing into bureaucratic fog, Colonel Elena Rourke, head of Air Force Investigations, once Riley's superior. Her office was all glass and steel, the city sprawling behind her like a map of choices. When I walked in, she rose. Captain Blake, you've been busy. I brought you something, I said, setting the drive on her desk. Proof of an internal sabotage order, issued under Commander Riley's name. She studied me for a long moment. Do you realize what this means? What could it cost? Yes, I said. But truth costs less than silence. She smiled faintly, spoken like a soldier who's learned what peace demands. 3 weeks later, the news broke. Air Force commander under investigation for mission sabotage. The headlines spread faster than I could read them. Reporters camped outside the base. My name surfaced again. This time, not as a pilot or a ghost, but as a witness. They called me brave. They called me reckless. But for the first time, they called me real. Riley was arrested quietly, escorted away under dawn light.
He didn't resist.
He didn't even look surprised. And when our eyes met across the tarmac, there was something like respect there, twisted, weary respect. I think he knew I'd finish what he started, just not the way he'd wanted. Weeks turned into months. The investigation closed. The skies grew quieter. My name faded from the headlines, and life began, slowly, to belong to me again. Ethan stayed for a while, helped with statements, logistics, the quiet aftermath of truth.
We didn't talk much about the past.
Some wounds are too precise to put into words. But one evening, as we stood watching the sunset bleed over the hangars, he said, "You ever think about flying again?" I looked up. "Every day." "Then maybe it's time," he said. There was something in his tone, a gentleness I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I smiled. Maybe it is. The first time I climbed back into a cockpit, it felt like exhaling after years underwater. The engines roared, the world tilted, and suddenly the ground was nothing but memory. Ethan's voice came through the radio, steady, warm. "Copy that, Phoenix lead. You're clear for ascent." Phoenix. My new call sign. Born from the fire that didn't consume me. As the clouds parted, the horizon stretched wide, endless, forgiving. Below me, the base looked small again. But for the first time, it wasn't a reminder of loss. It was proof of survival. I banked the jet toward the sun, laughter rising in my chest. Not the laughter of triumph, but of freedom. And as the sky swallowed me whole, I whispered to the wind. For every one of us who came home late, and everyone who never did, we're still flying.